He said, "I'm not a fool," and walked away from her and their unborn child. A year later, he saw her in the park, holding 3 babies who looked exactly like him. Adam Miller had always lived his life by numbers, logic, and control. Every part of his existence was built around precision: his suits, his office, his company, his expectations of others. He was a man who didn't believe in emotion because emotion was unpredictable, and unpredictability was weakness. The walls of his high-rise office reflected his success, glass and steel shining like armor. To everyone who worked under him, he was the definition of composure, a man who couldn't be shaken by anything, not even love. That was what he told himself when Emily walked out of his life a year earlier, tears in her eyes and truth on her lips. She had told him she was pregnant, her voice trembling, not from fear but from hope. He had looked at her with the same detached expression he used in business meetings and said, "I'm not a fool. That's not my child." The words had fallen from his mouth with such finality that even he had felt their echo, but he hadn't stopped them. He had watched her turn away, her shoulders straight even though he could tell she was breaking. He hadn't run after her, hadn't called, hadn't allowed himself to wonder if he might be wrong. For a while, he convinced himself that he was right to doubt her. He buried himself in work, signing deals, giving interviews, expanding his empire. If a thought of her came, he drowned it in another project or another late-night drink. Months passed like that, and soon she became nothing more than a faint memory, something that had once burned bright but had been extinguished by pride. Yet somewhere deep inside, there was an emptiness that nothing filled. He didn't name it, didn't think about it, because that would mean admitting he had lost something real. He told himself he wasn't made for family, that relationships were distractions, that she had been just another chapter. Still, there were nights when he found himself staring out of his penthouse window at the city lights, wondering why, despite all his victories, he felt so profoundly alone. He never expected to see her again. Life had a way of keeping the past buried, or so he thought. It was early spring, a rare warm day after months of winter, when he drove to the city park for a private meeting with investors. He stepped out of his car, phone in hand, already half-focused on the call, when he saw her. At first, he didn't recognize her. She looked different, softer somehow, her hair lighter, her posture more delicate but stronger at the same time. She was sitting on a wooden bench beneath a blooming cherry tree, the breeze playing with strands of her hair. In her arms lay not one baby, but 3. 3 tiny infants, wrapped in light blankets, each with the same small nose, the same round face, and the same bright blue eyes that he saw in his own mirror every morning. He froze mid-step, the phone slipping from his fingers, his heart pounding so hard it drowned out the sounds of the park around him. Emily looked up then, and their eyes met. The moment stretched between them like a wire pulled tight, full of tension and everything left unsaid. There was no anger in her face, no accusation, just calm acceptance, as if she had already made peace with his absence. Her expression told him that he was no longer part of her world, and the realization hit him harder than he was ready for. He started to walk toward her, unsure what he would say, whether to apologize or explain, but when he was close enough to speak, she stood. Her movements were graceful but firm, the way people move when they've decided never to look back. Her gaze met his, clear and unwavering, and she said quietly, "Don't. You're not a fool, remember?" Then she turned and walked away, pushing the stroller gently, the 3 tiny heads barely visible above the blankets. He stood there, unable to move, watching her figure grow smaller with every step. The park around him seemed to fade into silence. He wanted to call her name, to say something, anything, but his voice refused to come out. The image of her, of them, was burned into his mind. His hands trembled slightly, the first sign of weakness he had allowed himself in years. He felt the weight of his own arrogance settle heavy in his chest, pressing against the part of him that still believed he had been right. But as he watched her disappear into the sunlight, a thought crept into his mind, quiet and undeniable. What if he had been wrong all along? he didn't go to his meeting that day. He sat on that same bench for hours, staring at the spot where she had been, his thoughts unraveling like threads pulled from a fabric too tightly woven. For the first time in his life, Adam Miller couldn't control the situation in front of him. The power, the money, the status, none of it mattered. All that echoed in his mind were her words and the haunting image of three identical faces, each carrying a piece of him he had refused to acknowledge. When he finally rose from the bench, the world around him felt unfamiliar, as if the life he had built no longer belonged to him. That night, he returned to his penthouse, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The silence pressed down on him until it became unbearable. He poured himself a drink, but even the burn of whiskey couldn't erase the memory of those blue eyes. He tried to work, but every document blurred into meaninglessness. Sleep refused to come. By dawn, he found himself standing by the window again, looking out at the city, the first rays of sunlight creeping across the skyline. For years, that view had been his pride, a symbol of how far he had climbed. But now, staring at it, he saw only emptiness. For the first time, Adam realized that all his achievements had been built on a foundation of loneliness, and that somewhere out there, he had 3 sons, his sons, who didn't even know his name. When morning light filled the room completely, he made a decision without speaking it aloud. He would find her again. Not to fix things, not to demand forgiveness, but because he couldn't live another day pretending that nothing had happened. His entire life had been about control, but now, for once, he would let go of that. He would find her, no matter how long it took, because this time, he wasn't going to run from the truth. Adam spent the next several days haunted by the image of Emily and the 3 babies. He couldn't focus on anything else, the meetings blurred together, voices around him became distant noise, and even the steady rhythm of his once disciplined life lost its structure. His assistant noticed the change and asked if he was ill, but he waved her off, hiding behind the excuse of exhaustion. The truth was, he couldn't stop replaying that moment in the park. The blue eyes of those infants followed him everywhere, reflected in every mirror, every glass window. At night, when he tried to sleep, he could hear their soft cooing in his head, sounds he had never actually heard, but his mind supplied them anyway. He wondered about their names, their laughter, the way Emily might hold them when they cried. Each thought tore at him in a way he didn't know was possible. For years, Adam had been the kind of man who never questioned his decisions once they were made. Yet now, the certainty that had defined him was unraveling. He had told himself he wasn't ready to be a father, that Emily's pregnancy would have been a burden, an interruption to his career. But when he saw her with those 3 tiny lives, his own blood, his legacy, it felt as if the ground beneath him had given way. He realized with sickening clarity that it hadn't been logic guiding him when he pushed her away, it had been fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of love, fear of losing control. Now, that same fear had left him empty. He tried to rationalize it, to tell himself that it was too late to change anything, but his heart refused to accept that. He had spent his entire life building things, buildings, wealth, power, but now, he was faced with something he couldn't construct with money or willpower: forgiveness. One evening, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Adam drove back to the park where he had seen Emily. The sky was gray with clouds, the air cool and sharp with the scent of rain. He parked his car and sat there for a long time, staring at the same bench where she had once sat. Every passing person made his chest tighten with anticipation, but none of them were her. After nearly an hour, just as he was about to leave, he saw her again. She was walking slowly, pushing a double stroller this time, one of the boys in her arms while the other 2 rested side by side. Her hair was tied back, her clothes simple, her expression focused yet calm. She looked different from the woman he remembered, a kind of quiet strength had replaced the warmth she used to carry. He got out of the car, his pulse racing. For the first time in his life, Adam Miller didn't know what to say. Words, his sharpest weapon in the business world, failed him now. As he approached, Emily noticed him and stopped walking, her body tense but not surprised. It was as if she had expected this moment all along. He took a slow breath and said softly, "Emily." Her name felt foreign on his tongue, like a word he hadn't spoken in years. She didn't answer. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "Please, I just want to talk." She shifted the baby in her arms and looked at him with those calm, guarded eyes. "About what?" "About how you called me a liar. About how you decided you weren't a fool and walked away from your own children." Her tone wasn't angry, it was measured, cold in a way that hurt more than rage ever could. He flinched, unable to deny it. "I was wrong," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't believe you, and I can't take that back, but please, let me fix this." She let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "Fix it? You can't fix what you broke, Adam. You can't just appear after a year and decide you care now because you saw their faces." Her words hit him like glass shattering in his chest. He wanted to argue, to say that he had changed, that he would do anything, but he realized how hollow that would sound. Instead, he looked at the babies, 3 identical boys with his eyes and her gentle features, and his throat tightened. "They deserve to know me," he whispered. "I deserve to know them." Emily's gaze softened for a moment, but then she shook her head. "You don't get to decide that. You made your choice when you left. You said you weren't a fool, but the truth is, you were. You were just too proud to see it." She turned to go, and panic rose in him. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air before dropping back to his side. "Please," he said quietly, "let me at least help you. Anything you need." She paused but didn't turn around. "Help? You think money can help? You think I need your pity?" Her voice trembled slightly now, and he could see she was fighting not to cry. "What I needed was for you to believe in me when it mattered. And you didn't." With that, she walked away, her steps slow but steady, the babies babbling softly as the stroller rolled along. Adam stood there long after she disappeared from sight. The rain began to fall lightly, dotting his suit with dark spots, but he didn't move. Every word she said echoed in his mind, cutting deeper than he expected. He realized then that he couldn't simply buy his way back into her life or theirs. He had spent years mastering control, but the truth was, control had destroyed everything that mattered. He returned to his car, sitting in silence as rain slid down the windshield. The reflection staring back at him in the glass looked older, more hollow, a man who had finally seen the consequences of his arrogance. That night, when he returned home, the city felt different. The lights didn't shine the same, the sounds didn't fill him with purpose like they once did. He poured himself a drink, then set it aside untouched. For the first time, he didn't want to escape. He wanted to feel the weight of what he had done. He sat in his living room until the early hours of the morning, staring into the dark, making a quiet promise to himself. He would not give up this time. He didn't know how to earn her forgiveness or even if it was possible, but he knew one thing for certain, he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. The following weeks were a test of patience that Adam had never known before. He was a man accustomed to results, to deals concluded within days, to control that bent the world to his will. Yet this time, there was nothing he could force. Every morning, he found himself driving past the park, stopping his car at the same corner, waiting in silence for Emily to appear. Some days she didn't, and he would sit there for hours, staring at the empty benches until guilt gnawed at him so sharply that he had to leave. On the days she did come, he kept his distance. He didn't want to frighten her or seem like a man who thought he could fix everything with persistence. He only wanted to see that she and the boys were all right. Sometimes, when she wasn't looking, he would notice how she smiled at them, how her exhaustion never eclipsed her tenderness, how the boys' laughter seemed to wrap her in light. Watching her, he began to understand something he had never known before, that strength wasn't in domination or success. It was in love that endured without condition. He started learning about her life through quiet observation. She lived modestly in a small house near the edge of the city, worked part-time as a florist, and rarely had help. The boys, always dressed neatly despite the obvious financial struggle, were healthy, playful, and adored her. Adam felt both admiration and shame, admiration for the woman who had raised 3 children alone, and shame for having left her to do it. He knew she didn't want anything from him, but that only made him want to help more. Still, every time he imagined approaching her again, his own fear stopped him, the fear that she would turn him away, the fear that she would tell him he was too late. It was easier to wait in silence than to face the answer he dreaded most. One afternoon, as he was parked across from her house, a neighbor knocked on his car window. She was an older woman with kind eyes but a cautious look. "You've been sitting here a lot," she said. "You're not bothering Emily, are you?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, but protective, and he respected that. He shook his head quickly. "No. I'm not here to hurt her. I'm her. I'm someone who made a mistake." The woman studied him for a moment and sighed. "Then make it right, son. But don't waste time watching from the shadows. That woman's been through enough." The truth of her words cut deep, and after she walked away, he sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel, realizing that cowardice had never left him, it had only changed its shape. That night, Adam couldn't stop thinking about the boys. He imagined them sleeping, their tiny chests rising and falling, their small hands clutching at blankets. He wondered if they had favorite toys, what their first words had been, whether they liked stories before bed. The thought that he had missed all of that, every first step, every laugh, every sleepless night, filled him with a grief so heavy it made his chest ache. He had always believed that his greatest loss would be financial failure or public humiliation, but now he saw that his real loss was invisible and irretrievable. He had forfeited the chance to be a father from the very beginning, and it was no one's fault but his own. The next morning, something in him shifted. He woke early, not to go to work, but to drive to her neighborhood. When he arrived, Emily was outside, struggling to carry grocery bags while one of the babies cried in the stroller. Without thinking, he got out of the car and crossed the street. She saw him immediately, her eyes narrowing, but before she could speak, he picked up one of the bags that had fallen to the ground and placed it gently beside her door. "I'm not here to argue," he said quietly. "Just let me help." She didn't reply at first, clearly debating whether to send him away. Then, after a long silence, she said, "If you really want to help, then listen. Don't talk. Don't try to fix. Just listen." He nodded, humbled by how little she asked of him. They went inside together. The house was small but warm, filled with the faint scent of milk and flowers. Toys were scattered everywhere, and sunlight streamed through thin curtains, turning the room golden. It was nothing like his polished, cold penthouse, it felt alive, chaotic, real. The boys were lying on a soft rug, giggling and reaching for each other. For a moment, Adam forgot to breathe. Seeing them up close was overwhelming. They were perfect mirrors of one another, soft tufts of brown hair, round faces, blue eyes that glimmered with curiosity. When one of them looked up at him and smiled, his heart constricted painfully. He crouched down, hesitantly extending a hand. "Hey there," he whispered. The baby grabbed his finger instantly, giggling, and Adam felt something inside him break open. He had been touched by thousands of hands in his life, handshakes, contracts, deals, but never one so small, so pure. Emily watched him silently, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He could feel her gaze, but he didn't look up. He didn't want her to think his attention was anywhere else but on the boys. After a moment, she spoke softly. "Their names are Noah, Ethan, and Caleb." He repeated the names under his breath as if committing them to memory. "They look like you," he said finally, his voice trembling slightly. "They look like themselves," she corrected. "They're not reflections of anyone. They're their own people. He nodded, accepting the quiet reprimand. As the hours passed, the tension in the room softened. Emily moved around the kitchen, making tea while he played clumsily with the boys. He made them laugh by stacking blocks only for them to knock them down again. Every time they giggled, the sound filled the small house like music. When Emily finally sat beside him, she looked tired but less guarded. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You don't owe me anything." He looked at her then, meeting her gaze directly. "I know," he said. "But I owe them everything." It was a small moment, quiet and fragile, but it was the beginning of something he hadn't dared to hope for. That night, when he returned home, the silence didn't feel quite as empty. For the first time in years, his heart didn't feel like stone. He lay awake thinking of the sound of their laughter, of Emily's cautious eyes, of the warmth in that small house. It was a world he didn't belong to yet, but one he wanted to earn the right to enter. As he drifted toward sleep, he made himself a promise. He would prove to her, not through words but through time, that he could be more than the man who walked away. He would become the man who stayed. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Adam began to appear in Emily's life not as an intruder but as a quiet presence she could no longer ignore. At first, she tried to maintain her distance, telling herself that his sudden involvement was only a result of guilt, not genuine care. But he kept showing up in small, steady ways. He brought groceries without asking, fixed the broken step on her porch, and installed a new light above her front door after noticing how dark it got in the evenings when she carried the babies inside. He never asked for thanks or tried to talk about the past. He simply worked, often in silence, as if he knew words would only make things worse. For the first time in her life, Emily found herself unsure of how to react to him. The man she remembered had been confident to the point of arrogance, but the one standing before her now seemed stripped of pride. There was a quiet sincerity in everything he did, and it unsettled her more than his anger ever had. Adam, on his part, was learning the kind of patience he'd never known in his world of deadlines and control. Every time he saw Emily, he felt the weight of what he had done pressing against his chest, but he forced himself not to rush. He realized that trust wasn't something you could demand, it was something you had to earn, inch by inch, through consistency and humility. When he wasn't working or helping her, he spent his nights reading about parenting, about how to care for infants, about how to be present. It was strange and almost comical for a man who once negotiated million-dollar deals to now be studying how to swaddle a baby or warm a bottle properly, but he didn't care. The business world had taught him efficiency, but fatherhood, if he could even dare to call it that, was teaching him devotion. One morning, Emily found him outside her house, kneeling by his car, trying to install new child safety seats. She stood at the doorway, arms crossed, trying not to laugh. "You know," she said dryly, "there's a manual for that." He looked up, his face smeared with grease and confusion, then grinned awkwardly. "I was never great with manuals," he admitted. Something in his expression, humble, self-deprecating, almost boyish, caught her off guard. For the first time, she smiled at him, not out of politeness but genuine amusement. He noticed and froze, as if afraid to ruin the moment. She shook her head and came closer. "You're putting it in backward," she said, crouching beside him. Their hands brushed briefly as she showed him how to fasten the seat properly, and the contact, though fleeting, sent a warmth through him that he hadn't felt in years. Over time, Adam began spending more time with the boys. At first, Emily watched him carefully, ready to intervene if he faltered, but he surprised her. He was gentle, patient, and genuinely interested in them. He'd sit on the floor, letting them crawl over him, their laughter echoing through the small house as they tugged at his hair or tried to steal his phone. He didn't mind the mess, didn't flinch when they spilled milk on his expensive suit, didn't look at the clock once. He seemed content just to be there, grounded in a way that made Emily's heart ache. One evening, after the boys had fallen asleep, she came into the living room and found him still sitting on the floor, surrounded by toys, his head resting against the wall, eyes closed in exhaustion. She stood there quietly for a long moment, something shifting inside her. For so long, she had believed he was incapable of change. But maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. Still, she wasn't ready to forgive him. Her trust had been shattered too deeply to be restored overnight. She remembered how his words had cut through her when he denied her, how she had stood alone in a hospital room, clutching her newborns, wondering how she would raise them without him. Forgiveness, she thought, was not an open door, it was a slow, creaking hinge, and right now, it was only beginning to move. Yet she couldn't deny what she saw in him. The way he looked at the boys, the way he seemed to memorize every detail of their faces, spoke of a man who wasn't pretending anymore. Sometimes, late at night, she'd catch him staring at them while they slept, a look of wonder and regret written across his face. He wasn't the man she had fallen in love with before. That man had been polished and confident. This one was raw, unguarded, almost fragile, and that scared her even more. One afternoon, when Emily had to run an errand, she asked him if he could stay with the boys for a few hours. It was the first time she had trusted him with them alone. He agreed immediately, his voice steady, though his heart raced. As she left, she glanced back, expecting chaos. Instead, she returned later to find all three asleep on the couch, two nestled against his chest, one resting in his lap. Adam was half awake, humming softly, his fingers gently brushing through their hair. The sight froze her in place. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. It was such a simple image, but it carried a weight she couldn't explain. She saw in it everything she had once dreamed of and everything she had convinced herself she could live without. When he opened his eyes and saw her, he straightened slightly, as if embarrassed. "They wore me out," he said with a tired smile. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, brushing her fingers across one of the boy's cheeks. "You did good," she said finally. The words were quiet, almost reluctant, but they made his chest tighten with emotion. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a small sign that she saw him differently now. That night, long after he went home, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind filled with images of Adam's face as he held their sons. There had been something real in his eyes, something she couldn't dismiss anymore. She turned to look at the boys, sleeping peacefully in their cribs, and wondered what kind of future she was building for them. For so long, she had believed that protecting them meant keeping him away. Now, she wasn't so sure. Maybe what they needed wasn't just her strength, but his presence too. Adam, meanwhile, sat in his car outside his apartment, unable to go inside. The silence of the city around him felt less like peace and more like punishment. He thought about Emily's words, about the small flicker of trust that had appeared between them. It wasn't enough yet, it was fragile, almost imperceptible, but it was there. For the first time in his life, Adam understood that real love wasn't about grand gestures or control. It was about showing up, again and again, even when the door was only half open. He rested his head against the steering wheel, closed his eyes, and made a silent promise. He wouldn't stop showing up, no matter how long it took. The first signs of real change came slowly, almost invisibly, like the shifting of the tide. Emily began to let Adam into their daily routines, not completely, but enough for him to feel the difference. He would arrive early in the morning, helping to prepare breakfast or carry the boys outside for a walk while she tidied the house. At first, it was awkward, the silence between them was filled with things neither of them dared to say. Yet day after day, that silence softened, becoming something familiar rather than hostile. The boys adored him now, running to him with squeals of laughter whenever he appeared at the door. They clung to his legs, tugged on his sleeves, and fought for his attention, and each time they called him "Duh" or "Addy," his throat tightened with emotion he couldn't quite name. It wasn't a title he had earned yet, but it was one he would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. For Emily, watching Adam with the boys was both comforting and painful. There were moments when her heart softened unexpectedly, like when she saw him sitting on the floor covered in baby food, laughing instead of scolding, or when he let one of them pull at his tie until it came undone and then simply smiled. Yet with every small gesture, she also felt the sting of the past. She couldn't erase the image of herself in that hospital room, exhausted and alone, clutching her newborn sons while wondering why their father had chosen not to believe in them. Forgiveness didn't come naturally, it was something she wrestled with every day. Sometimes, when Adam wasn't looking, she studied his face, searching for traces of the man she once knew and wondering if she could ever trust him completely again. Adam understood her hesitation better than she realized. He knew he didn't deserve an easy path to redemption. He saw it in her eyes every time she looked at him with quiet caution, in the way she sometimes pulled back just as he thought they were growing closer. But instead of withdrawing, he made a decision, to earn her trust not through words but through presence. He began to show up for everything: doctor's appointments, playdates, sleepless nights when one of the boys had a fever. He never tried to take over or make decisions for her, he simply stood beside her, matching her steps, showing her that she wasn't alone anymore. Over time, she began to rely on him in small ways, handing him a bottle without thinking, asking him to watch the boys while she showered, even letting him pick out their clothes some mornings. Each act, however ordinary, felt monumental to him, proof that she was beginning to let him stay. One evening, after putting the boys to bed, they sat together in the kitchen. The only light came from the small lamp on the counter, casting a soft glow that made the room feel almost intimate. Emily was sipping tea, her hair pulled back loosely, her face tired but peaceful. Adam sat across from her, turning a small toy car between his fingers. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore, it was gentle, like a truce. After a while, she spoke without looking up. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. He didn't need to ask what she meant. His answer came quickly, quietly. "Every day." She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "You could have just stayed away, you know. Most men would have." He looked at her then, his voice firm but low. "I tried. I couldn't." For a moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, fragile but real. Over the following weeks, their rhythm continued to evolve. Adam started taking the boys to the park on his own while Emily ran errands or simply took time for herself, something she hadn't done in years. He discovered that fatherhood wasn't about perfection, it was about being there, even when you didn't know what you were doing. He made mistakes, plenty of them. He forgot snacks, mixed up bottles, let the boys get too close to puddles. But every time he failed, he learned. Every time one of them cried, he found new patience. He discovered that love wasn't about control but about surrender, surrendering to the mess, the exhaustion, the chaos of it all. One rainy afternoon, when Emily returned from work, she found him in the living room building a fort out of pillows and blankets. The boys were inside, giggling uncontrollably as he crawled through the tunnel after them, pretending to be a monster. The sight made her laugh out loud, a sound that startled even herself. He turned toward her, surprised, then grinned. "You're home early," he said, his hair messy, his shirt untucked, his sleeves rolled up. She shook her head, still smiling. "You look ridiculous." He laughed too, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Yeah, but they love it." The warmth in his voice was so pure that it silenced the sarcasm on her tongue. For the first time in a long while, the house felt like a home, not just a place where life happened but where life was being built. That night, after the boys were asleep, Emily stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Adam was cleaning up the mess from their fort, humming quietly under his breath. When he finished, he turned to her and asked softly, "Are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated before answering. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "But it's the first time in a long time I've felt calm." He nodded, a faint smile on his lips. Then I'll take that as a start. She didn't respond, but her expression softened, and when he left that night, she found herself standing at the door longer than usual, watching his car disappear down the street. In the weeks that followed, Emily began to notice changes in herself as well. She laughed more easily, slept more peacefully, and no longer felt the constant weight of doing everything alone. The presence of Adam and the boys together had begun to fill the house with a kind of peace she hadn't believed possible. Yet beneath that peace, a quiet fear lingered, the fear that it was temporary, that one day he might disappear again. She tried to push it aside, but it followed her like a shadow. Adam sensed it, though she never said it aloud, and he knew that his next step wasn't just to prove he could stay, it was to prove he would never leave. Late one night, when everyone else was asleep, Adam sat alone in his apartment, staring at an old photograph of Emily he had kept hidden in a drawer. It was taken years ago, before everything fell apart. Her smile in that picture was radiant, unguarded, alive. He had spent so long trying to forget that version of her, but now he realized he didn't want to. He wanted to earn the right to see her smile like that again, not as a memory, but as a reality. As he turned off the light and prepared for bed, a quiet determination filled him. He didn't know how long it would take, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing success or approval. He was chasing redemption, and for once, that felt like enough. Winter came quietly, bringing with it a calm rhythm that both soothed and unsettled Emily. The boys were growing fast, their laughter echoing through the house like music, and Adam had become such a constant presence that she could hardly remember what her days had been like without him. He picked the boys up in the morning so she could get extra sleep, helped with bath time in the evenings, and had even learned to braid their fine baby hair in a way that made her laugh every time she saw the results. Yet with every moment of warmth came the reminder of how fragile it all still was. There were no promises between them, no words of love, no clear future. What they had now was a balance between past pain and present comfort, and she was afraid that one wrong step could shatter it. Adam, meanwhile, felt as though he was living in a dream he didn't deserve. Each morning when he saw Emily in the kitchen, her hair slightly messy and her eyes still sleepy, something inside him softened. He never said it aloud, but he loved her more now than he ever had before, because now he understood what love actually was. It wasn't possession or control, it was patience, care, and showing up without expecting anything in return. He had spent his whole life chasing recognition, but now all he wanted was to be the man she could finally lean on without fear. Yet even as things grew more natural between them, he could sense that she still held back. Some nights, when she thought he wasn't looking, she would retreat into herself, her gaze distant, as if she was waiting for him to prove that this version of him wasn't temporary. One evening in late January, a snowstorm swept through the city. The roads were slick, the wind howled outside, and Emily's power went out just as the boys were getting ready for bed. She tried to hide her frustration, lighting candles while shushing their frightened cries, but the house grew colder by the minute. When she called the electric company and got no clear answer, panic began to rise in her chest. She was just about to wrap the boys in blankets when she heard a car pull up outside. A moment later, there was a knock at the door, and when she opened it, Adam stood there, his hair dusted with snow, his breath forming clouds in the icy air. "You didn't think I'd let you freeze alone, did you?" he said, stepping inside before she could protest. He carried 2 large bags, one with flashlights and blankets, the other with hot food. As he moved through the house, lighting candles and checking the windows, Emily watched him in silence. The boys immediately ran to him, laughing and clinging to his legs, their fear replaced by excitement. He lifted one of them into his arms and said lightly, "It looks like we're having a snow adventure tonight." The warmth in his voice eased something inside her. They ate together by candlelight, the boys tucked into his side as he told them stories about snowstorms and brave explorers. The flicker of the candles cast shadows across his face, and Emily couldn't help but notice how gentle he looked, how at peace. After the boys finally fell asleep, wrapped in blankets near the fireplace, the house grew quiet again. She sat on the couch, her knees drawn up, and he joined her, handing her a cup of tea. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind outside and the faint crackle of the fire. Emily stared into the flames, her mind full of questions she wasn't sure she wanted to ask. Finally, she said softly, "Why are you doing this, Adam?" "Really?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Because I want to," he said simply. "Because I should have been here all along." She shook her head, her voice almost trembling. "That's not an answer. You could have just moved on, found someone else, started over. Why come back to this?" He looked at her then, his blue eyes steady and full of something that made her chest tighten. "Because this is the only thing that ever felt real. I've had everything else, money, success, control, but none of it meant anything. You and the boys are the only things that make me want to be a better man." The honesty in his voice broke through her defenses in a way she hadn't expected. She felt tears welling up but quickly blinked them away. "You hurt me," she whispered. "You broke something in me that took years to fix." He nodded, his voice quiet but certain. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man who puts it back together, even if you never love me again." The silence that followed was heavy but not suffocating. Emily looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt, but there was none. For the first time, she saw not the man who had once left her, but the man who had chosen to stay. As the night went on, the snow outside thickened, wrapping the world in white. The fire burned low, and the warmth of the room felt almost fragile. Emily leaned back against the couch, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Adam stood to check on the boys, adjusting their blankets and brushing the hair from their foreheads. When he returned, she had drifted halfway to sleep, her head resting against the arm of the couch. Without thinking, he took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, and she murmured, "You don't have to keep taking care of us." He smiled faintly, sitting beside her again. "I know," he said softly. "But I want to." She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either. When morning came, the storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the frosted windows, turning everything gold. The boys woke up laughing, their energy filling the room again. Emily found herself smiling too, the heaviness in her chest lighter than it had been in years. As she stood by the window, watching the snow glisten outside, she felt Adam's presence behind her. He handed her a mug of coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. "You should rest today," he said quietly. "You've done enough." She looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see him as the man who had failed her. She saw him as the man who was still there, who had come through the storm and stayed. That day marked something neither of them spoke about but both understood. The distance between them was still there, but it was smaller now, softened by shared nights, quiet words, and the simple act of showing up. Emily still wasn't ready to call it love again, but she knew one thing for certain, she no longer feared the idea of letting him close. And for Adam, that was enough. It wasn't a grand reconciliation or a dramatic confession. It was something better, real, fragile, and earned. The beginning of forgiveness had taken root, and though it was buried under layers of pain and history, it was growing, quietly but surely, like spring waiting beneath the snow. Spring returned with its quiet warmth, melting the last traces of winter and bringing color back to the world. For Emily, the season felt like a reflection of her own heart, still cautious, but slowly thawing after years of cold. Life had settled into a new rhythm that, to her surprise, felt natural. Adam came by almost every day, not because she asked him to but because he wanted to. He had become part of their lives in ways that were no longer awkward or forced. The boys adored him, and she had to admit that his presence had changed everything for the better. The house felt lighter, laughter came easier, and even the long, exhausting days didn't seem so heavy anymore. She caught herself humming while cooking, smiling for no reason, and it both comforted and frightened her. She didn't want to rely on him, yet she already did, and she wasn't sure when that had happened. Adam noticed the changes too. There were moments when he caught her watching him and she didn't look away, moments when she laughed without hesitation, and he could almost see the walls around her heart beginning to crumble. He never mentioned it, never pushed for more, but every time she opened up even a little, he held onto it like something sacred. For him, every smile from her was a victory, every moment of trust a gift he didn't take for granted. He didn't think about the future in the same way he once had. Instead of planning years ahead, he learned to live in the small, quiet moments that built their days. He began to believe that redemption wasn't found in grand gestures but in constancy, in being there when it mattered, in listening more than he spoke, in showing her through action that this time, he wasn't going anywhere. One afternoon, while Emily was at work, Adam took the boys to the park. It had become their favorite place, the same park where he had first seen them a year earlier. Watching them play now, running on unsteady legs and laughing at everything, felt surreal. He sat on a bench, his coat slung over his shoulder, and thought about how much could change in a year. There was a time when he couldn't even imagine himself sitting in a place like this, surrounded by chaos and joy, yet now he couldn't imagine being anywhere else. When Emily arrived to meet them later, she found the three of them sitting in the grass, a pile of flowers and leaves scattered around them. The boys were trying to braid clumsy flower crowns, and Adam was pretending to model one for them, his head tilted dramatically as they laughed. She stood watching them for a while before he noticed her, his grin widening when he did. "We're making crowns for the queens of the house," he said playfully, handing her a misshapen one made of daisies. She rolled her eyes but couldn't stop smiling as she took it. That evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Emily lingered in the kitchen while Adam cleaned up. There was a quiet between them that felt heavy but not uncomfortable. She could feel him watching her as she rinsed dishes, and when she turned, their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them looked away. Then, softly, she said, "You've changed." He tilted his head slightly, unsure if it was a statement or a question. "I had to," he replied finally. "I didn't like the man I used to be." She nodded slowly, drying her hands. "Neither did I." Her voice wasn't cruel, just honest, and he accepted it. "But I like who you are now," she added quietly, almost as if she hadn't meant to say it out loud. The words hung between them, fragile and warm, and he felt something inside him break open in the gentlest way. He didn't move toward her, didn't speak. He just stood there, afraid that even breathing too loudly might ruin the moment. The following weeks brought more moments like that, small but powerful, tiny steps forward that neither of them rushed. They started having dinner together more often, not because they planned to but because it simply made sense. Sometimes they talked late into the night after the boys were asleep, sharing stories from the years they had missed. Emily told him about her struggles as a single mother, about the nights she cried herself to sleep from exhaustion, about the fear of failing her children. Adam listened in silence, his eyes filled with regret but never pity. When she finished, he took a deep breath and said quietly, "I can't change what I did, but I can make sure you never have to feel that alone again." The sincerity in his tone made her chest tighten, and she had to look away before he saw the tears in her eyes. As the days grew warmer, they took the boys to the beach for the first time. The sunlight sparkled on the water, and the twins ran in the sand while Adam helped the youngest build a crooked little sandcastle. Emily sat nearby, watching them, her heart so full it almost hurt. There was a part of her that still wanted to hold on to the past, to the anger that had protected her for so long, but it was slipping through her fingers like sand. The man playing in the surf with her children wasn't the same man who had once denied them. He was softer now, wiser, and she realized that maybe people really could change, not because they wanted to be forgiven, but because they finally understood what they had destroyed. That night, they all fell asleep in the car on the drive home, the boys in the back seat, Emily resting her head against the window, and Adam quietly glancing at her every few minutes. The fading light of the sunset painted her face in gold, and he thought she looked like peace itself. He wanted to tell her then, wanted to say how much he loved her, how grateful he was for every second she allowed him to stay, but he knew it wasn't the right time. Love, he had learned, didn't need to be declared to exist. Sometimes it was enough just to be there, quietly, faithfully, letting time speak for you. When they arrived home, Emily stirred awake as he carried the sleeping boys inside. She followed him, standing at the doorway as he tucked them into their beds. He turned around, surprised to find her watching him, and for a moment they simply looked at each other in the dim light of the hallway. Then she stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "For today. For everything." He wanted to tell her that she didn't need to thank him, but instead he just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. She hesitated, then reached up, brushing a strand of hair from his face. The gesture was so small, yet it felt like a lifetime's worth of forgiveness in a single touch. That night, long after she had gone to bed, Adam sat alone on the porch, listening to the soft sound of the ocean in the distance. The house behind him glowed faintly, warm and alive, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging he couldn't explain. He didn't know what the future would look like or whether he would ever truly make up for the past, but he knew that he wasn't the same man who once walked away. He was someone who had learned how to love, not through possession or pride, but through patience, humility, and the courage to stay. The summer sun had settled over the city in soft gold, and everything seemed to slow down. The boys were older now, their words clearer, their laughter louder, and their bond with Adam unshakable. He had become part of their lives so seamlessly that strangers often assumed he had always been there. Sometimes, when Emily watched them together, she found herself forgetting the pain that had once filled the space between them. It hadn't disappeared, it never truly would, but it no longer defined them. The house that had once been quiet and heavy now overflowed with warmth, chaos, and a sense of belonging that felt almost unreal. Yet beneath that peace, there lingered a question neither she nor Adam had dared to ask: what came next? They had built something fragile but strong, a life stitched together by forgiveness and love unspoken. The only thing missing was the courage to acknowledge what they both already knew. Adam had thought about it for months. He wanted to tell her that he loved her, not in the desperate way he once had, but in a way that meant something, steady, humble, certain. Yet every time he looked at her, the words caught in his throat. He feared saying them might break the fragile balance they had built, that she would retreat into the safety of distance. So he waited, hoping that someday she would meet him halfway. That day came on a quiet afternoon in late July. They had taken the boys to the park again, the same place where so much had once begun and ended. The sun shimmered through the trees, and the boys were chasing bubbles, their laughter echoing like music. Emily was sitting on a bench, watching them, her face softened by the light. When Adam sat beside her, she didn't move away. They watched the children in silence for a while before she spoke. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked quietly. "The first time you saw them here?" He nodded, his voice low. "I think about it every day." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "I used to hate you for it," she admitted. "For doubting me. For doubting them." He met her gaze, his expression solemn. "You had every right to." There was a long pause before she spoke again, her tone softer this time. "I don't hate you anymore." The words were simple, but they hit him harder than anything she could have said. He turned to look at her, searching her face for any sign of hesitation, but there was none. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes carried a quiet peace. "You've changed, Adam," she said. "And I see it every day. I just needed time to believe it was real." He felt something tighten in his chest, something that had been waiting too long to be released. "It's real," he said. "You and the boys, you're my life now." She didn't answer right away, just nodded slowly, as if weighing his words. The air between them was thick with everything unspoken, everything they had been too afraid to name. Then, with a deep breath, she said the one thing he never expected to hear. "I know." That night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Emily stepped outside to find Adam sitting on the porch, staring out at the quiet street. The soft hum of crickets filled the air, and the sky above them shimmered with faint stars. She hesitated in the doorway before walking over and sitting beside him. For a while, they said nothing. Then she spoke, her voice low. "Do you remember the night you told me you didn't owe me or them anything?" He nodded, shame flashing across his face, but she continued before he could speak. "You were wrong. You owed them everything. And you owed yourself the chance to become who you were meant to be." Her words weren't cruel, they were truth spoken without anger. He exhaled slowly, nodding. "I know," he said quietly. "And I'm trying, every day." She looked at him then, her expression unreadable, and after a long pause, she whispered, "You're doing better than trying." Something in her tone shifted the air between them. Adam turned to her, his heart pounding. For years, he had rehearsed what he would say if this moment ever came, but now that it was here, words felt small. "Emily," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I love you. Not because I want to fix the past, not because I think I deserve you, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. You're the only thing that ever made sense." She didn't respond immediately, and for a moment he feared he had said too much. Then she reached out, placing her hand over his. "You don't have to imagine it without me," she said softly. "You already have us. All of us." Her hand tightened around his, and when she leaned her head against his shoulder, it felt like everything he had been searching for had finally found its place. The days that followed were quiet but different. There were no declarations, no dramatic changes, just a sense of ease that had never been there before. The house seemed brighter, lighter, as if it recognized the peace that had finally settled within its walls. Adam moved through each day with gratitude, from the sound of the boys' laughter to the simple joy of seeing Emily smile across the breakfast table. He still carried his regrets, but they no longer defined him, they had become lessons, reminders of how far he had come. Emily, too, found herself softer toward him, her guard slowly dissolving. Sometimes she would catch herself reaching for his hand without thinking, or laughing at his quiet jokes, or watching him with a warmth she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It wasn't just forgiveness, it was love, rebuilt piece by piece, stronger for having been broken. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adam stood in the backyard watching the boys chase fireflies. Emily came out to join him, her hair loose, her eyes glowing in the fading light. He turned to her, a smile tugging at his lips. "Do you ever think about how different everything could have been?" She nodded. "All the time. But if it had been different, maybe we wouldn't have ended up here." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached for her hand. "Then I'm glad we did." She smiled faintly. "Me too." As the boys ran toward them, laughing and shouting, Emily and Adam stood together, the soft hum of the summer evening wrapping around them. For the first time in years, there were no walls, no shadows, no distance. Just family, whole and imperfect, exactly as it was meant to be. That night, after the children were asleep, Emily lay in bed beside Adam, her hand resting against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. There was no need for words. The past had left scars, but those scars had led them here, to a place where love wasn't about promises but about presence. In the quiet of the night, with the warmth of his arm around her and the sound of their children breathing softly in the next room, Emily realized that they had finally found what they had both been searching for. Not perfection, not redemption, but peace. The kind of peace that only comes after the storm, fragile yet unshakable, born not from forgetting but from choosing to love anyway.